to you today about horsebread, which is food for horses and the masses. I have given you a handout which is, quite frankly, the best history out there on horsebread that is in English and that we can readily read. He is very, very good at his writing. But the earliest known use of the noun horsebread is in the early Middle English period, so 1150 to 1500. And the Oxford Dictionary has it as the earliest evidence is 1467, and we still feed horsebread today. So it's been around for just a little while. It changes because a lot of people didn't write down the recipe. There are 3 recipes in your packet, and we are going to try a couple of recipes as well. So the question is, we talk about horse food and everything, and we're like, well, what were horses eating at that time? And for the most part, it's oats, hay, straw, cut grass, some bran, beans, peas, and the horsebread. We know that they were also growing fetches, which is a type of grass. We call it weed here in the United States, and they were feeding that. And we know that from tax assessments. In 1304, they were growing up to 3 acres of fetches to feed to animals. So why do we feed some things to some animals and not to others? Well, fetch seeds happen to be poisonous to cattle. So you don't feed cattle fetch seeds. How many horse people are in here? Okay, how many chefs, cooks? Okay. So I'm going to assume that we have moderate knowledge of some of these things. So this here is wheat in its original form, and all they're doing is harvesting this piece, okay, right here. You can touch them, which leaves us with all of this. And so this is where wheat straw comes from. The interesting thing about straw, when you have it in this form, is it's pretty water resistant, which is why we use it for targets, for archery targets and a lot of other things, but it only absorbs the water from each end. So today, we crush it up, and it's more this size, and it's very flat, and so that it can absorb more things. But it looked like this more during this time period. And they used it for a lot of things. You can feed it to a horse, and they did, but there's not a lot of nutritional value there. They will occasionally eat their straw, but most horses will leave their bedding alone. That's not their thing. So you still have to come up with something that is more palatable. So for those of you who garden, as we tip it over, you've certainly seen these. These are raw carrots. These are actually sold here in the U.S. as deer carrots. And there are definitely times when they talk about just dumping a bushel of carrots in a stall or a paddock, and that's what their dinner was for the day, because that's when they had carrots. You can put carrots in horsebread. It works better if you shred them, but you can put anything in there. I'm going to put them right there and try not to knock them over. So you probably have seen split peas before. Most of us, peas come out of a can and they're kind of mushy. Split peas, green peas, dried ones, they are not that way. And when you knead it into horsebread, it feels really weird, the texture. But they end up with little green bites in it, and they do get softer because you soak them, but they're never mushy like the peas that we have now, which is why I wanted to talk about them, because I had never used dried peas before, and I really thought they would get mushy, and they did not. But they fed those to horses. They fed oats to horses. And oats we still use today. This is a set of rolled oats. And they have more nutritional value in them. And they certainly put oats into the bread until, for six centuries, they made horsebread and never talked about flour. They talked about how much the cost of wheat was. And then you made everything into that. So it was all about the raw products. We know that corn didn't get into the mix in Europe for quite a long time, but you can can see that this is the type of corn that you would feed to a horse, and it's still very tough. This is today's feed, and it's called extruded feed because they basically make it like a Cocoa Puff. So it has more nutritional value than a Cocoa Puff, but this is essentially what it is. It's kind of, this is a senior feed, and it's meant to be easy for them to digest, and it's easy on their teeth. The reason why I'm showing you all this is so you can see the difference in what they eat, and in a second we'll look at the texture. So for the most part, they didn't have hay as we think of hay today. It would have been long, it would have been grassy, it would have been a little bit more like this. You can see where this could get moisture in it. It's not tubular like the wheat straw. So when this gets wet, it tends to rot. So why is that important? Well, if you're in the city and you're trying to feed your horse and your hay keeps rotting on you, probably the nutritional value of it's not very good. And it's not really convenient to haul these around. As you can see, they get stuck on everything. So again, not real convenient, even though it's much more moisture resistant. And there's not a lot of nutritional value in it. So then we have the question of, well, how expensive was it to feed them? And I'm going to read this to you. Arnold Gacy, who was the keeper of the king's great horses from October 26, 1330 to December 15, 1331, is illustrated of this level of this expense. Arnold's accounts records a total expense for the account of 783 pounds, 3 shillings, 8.5 pennies for as many as 120 horses. Of this amount, 524 pounds was spent directly on food for the horses. 145 of that was hay. 352 of it was on what they call quarters, and 3 packs of oats, 14 quarters, and 5.5 bushels of bran. There was also a lot of horsebread in that. For the cut grass that we talked about, the hay, that was 11 pounds, and that's in the summer. It was 13 pounds for straw for 115 horses, 112 horses, sorry. So clearly they're not feeding a lot of hay, they're not feeding a lot of straw. So that's a problem. Why was the feed expensive? Well, because you have to haul it into the city. It's not so bad when you're out at the manor and it's right there and you're just making it. But when you have to haul it, it's a whole different story. There are 2 classes of bread, according to English law, at this time. One is man's bread and one is horse bread. There are 3 types of horse bread within that. There's the bread made of beans and pea flour, and then there's one that is made from wheat bran or chisel with the addition of flour. And then there is the bread that was made of mixed pulses and grain flour. So basically it's, to a certain extent, whatever you have available, but these are the main ingredients for them. In 1389, an act of parliament specified that hostlers and innkeepers were not permitted to make horse bread for sale, and it could only be made by certified bakers. So they got very, very specific about who could and couldn't make these loaves, and the weight and the price of the loaves should be reasonable after the price of corn in the market. Oddly enough, there's no penalty for offenders, and there's not very many times where you catch somebody that broke this law, so we don't really know how effective it was, but it was there. In 1402, the fine was set at 3 times the value of bread sold. So this is when it starts getting a little bit more teeth. And in 1540, these terms were amended so that any hostler or innkeeper in a town that had not seen a baker in 7 years, so 7 years without a baker, then you would be allowed to make horse bread for sale as long as the price was reasonable according to the price of grains of corn that is now. And then in 1632, the act concerning hostlers and innholders where justices of peace were given the authority to set the fine as they saw fit. So clearly this was a large part of the transportation and basic horse industry, because if you can't get your horses fed as you move around town, it kind of slows everything down. in town, because if you're out in the country or not traveling, you just go and get some grass. But if you're someplace where it's a little harder to get the grass, you need horsebread. You'll see in your packets that there is a lot of historical references to horsebread. It's in Don Quixote, it's in a lot of other things, but we just kind of read past it because it's like, oh, my horse was the best to ever eat bread. Well, what does that mean? And we never really investigated horsebread until a few years ago. And I would say in the last 20 years is when we really rediscovered horsebread for the Middle Ages. And a lot of the stuff that we know about is from this gentleman called Gervais Markham, who some of you might know. Do anybody know him? He wrote the English Housewife, which is a very popular book. I've seen it here in the SEA. So he wrote like a book a year and was quite prolific. So one of the things that he said was, first, therefore, you shall understand that the principal food whereupon a running horse is to be fed most, as the very strength and chief substance of his life, must be bread. For it is of all other foods most strong, clean, healthful, and best digesting, and the breed of the best bread, of the best blood. So if you had a really good horse, you should be feeding it really good bread. And he also said in England and in other places, a certain bread, which they call horse bread, is so general among them that you should not find an inn, an alehouse, or common harbor which doth not the same. So it's definitely out there. I do have some pictures of the recipe that he had. I think there's an abbreviated version in your packet, but it actually takes like, I don't know, 5 pages for him to write out the recipe, most of which just consist of grinding down the meal. There was a lot of that. I think because it was pretty tough stuff. There's a couple of other recipes out there. For the most part, we don't have a lot of recipes because the bakers didn't write this stuff down. And it was very, very common. So as long as you could get the bread to rise and it had these 2 main components, you put in whatever you wanted. So this recipe is you grind up 3 pecks of beans with 1 peck of wheat into fine flour or meal, and make it up with a sweet yeast and a little spring water. Knead very, very painfully and thoroughly, and suffer in it to lie in the trough, a space to rise and become light, then knead it again, and make it into loaves as big as 6-penny ones, and let them soak well in an oven, and then take out hot, turn them upside down, and suffer them in the manner to cool. Which is really tough to say. I'm missing some words there. But then you have to wait 3 days before you feed this to your horse. And if you wait 3 days after the baking, and not before, for fear of surfeiting your horse, you may cut the bread into thin shavings and lay it a while to dry. Put amongst the oats, crumbling it small, and make it your horse not exceed more bread than 1.5 pounds at the time. The oats you mix in it must be carefully shifted. This bait given in the morning, first of all. You may, after 11 o'clock, give him another portion of the bread, and so on and so on. So that's how they fed their horses, and they were very concerned about them not getting too hot, which means that they feel very good. Now, we're talking about this in terms of horses, so where did the people come in? The people, if you were poor enough, had to buy this type of bread. And if you are eating bread that's made for animals, people don't think very well of you. And they talk a lot in the one, I think in there, about having a stomach like an ostrich. Not really sure what exactly they knew about ostriches back then, but they very much, multiple places say that you have a stomach like an ostrich. I'm assuming that means you can digest tough stuff. And good luck if you had bad teeth. But there are multiple places where they're recorded as having survived famines on horsebread. If you ran out of food, this is the first thing that people went to. There's also dog bread that's out there. I've not seen a recipe for that, but it does pop up every once in a while. But basically, you had to be really poor to be eating this. And then we get into the whole idea of feeding it to the racehorses. And then it becomes this really nice bread, and it's significantly better than what the peasants are being fed. There's numerous accounts of that, that it being much more refined. So there's 3 recipes in your packet about how you start out with a racehorse. You start out with the coarser stuff. As they get closer to the date that they're going to race, because back then they would have, it's not like today where you go to a racetrack and they're all lined up and there's 11 races. Back then they would have said, hey, I challenge you, and so our horses are going to meet on such and such a day, and we train up to that. So they would have gotten this one recipe first. It's a little bit coarser. Then they move to the second recipe, and then they move to the third, which I have a version of today. It has a lot of eggs in it. If you follow the actual recipe, it has 20 eggs in it. I didn't need that much horse bread, so I kind of scrunched it down, and I went to a 3-to-1. So it's 3 cups of wheat flour, 1 cup of, I forgot what I put in there, chickpea flour, and then yeast. And then you pretty much just let it be, and we put the 4 eggs in it. I had photos of it, but I don't think the photos are showing right now. But they, oh yeah, here they are. You can, so I had, oh, ale is the other thing you put in there. I put a can of beer. Apparently, I'm not an alcohol drinker. My brother says that I used the wrong type. I said, well, we used it for the slugs, to kill the slugs, so I thought it was going to be good. No, next time use an IPA. So, don't use Coors Light next time. Or Bud Light. He was like, no. I was like, it was cheap. I'm sure that back in the day they did the same thing. It was cheap. So, that's the other thing. But it looks terribly, terribly disgusting when it has the 4 eggs in it. And I mixed and I mixed and I mixed and I mixed, and it was still very yolky yellow. And I cooked it, and it came out really golden brown, and we'll have it in just a second. But it was, both of them, if you're sensitive to textures, don't make horse bread. Yeah. The first one that we're going to try, though, it has it is a recipe that has seaweed in it. And so this does have seaweed, chickpea flour, whole wheat flour, the split green peas. You can use split yellow peas too, but apparently my grocery store doesn't have them. And then yeast. And you just mix it all together. You let it rise like 3 times and fold it back in and that type of thing. Clearly I'm not a baker. And then you stick it in the oven and you cook it for about 35 minutes, and voila, it comes out. The first one I struggled with, which has got the seaweed and the split peas in, I struggled with a little bit getting it fully cooked in the middle because it was very, very dense, and it has some weight to it. It really did. And I can see where they sold it by the pound, and this would have been a heavy piece, probably 5, 6, they say up to 10 pounds that they would haul them around with. So that was a pretty substantial piece of bread. The one that's made with the eggs, that's much lighter. I liked the first one, the horses really liked the first one. My mom liked the second one with the eggs in it. 3 of my horses ate the one with the egg in it, the other one was like, nope, not for me. He was very clear about that. Nope. I do have some videos of them eating it if you are interested, and unfortunately we don't have a screen projector, so we'll just make it work. But they were very interested in it.
Can you drop your laptop screen, like angle it towards us a little bit?
Let me...
Yes, we do want to see.
Of course we'll see your
Yes. I want to see pony refusals as well.
The refusal one is not on here. There was a lot of... He was... So one thing I did determine, so all of our horses are over the age of 18. Draken is 33 right now. He'll be the first one up. When he ate the second one, he had trouble with it sticking to his teeth. And I thought, well, there's something that I hadn't thought about. You have teeth in your horses. Let's see if we can get this away.
Were you worried about choking at all with them?
It was the first time.
Yeah.
And then he just gobbled it, and I was like, no, not a problem.
Okay.
I didn't give it to our minis because they are prone to choke. And I was like, I'm not going to even chance it with you.
Like the gobblers.
Yes. And I started with him.
Can you tilt it?
Tilt it. This way.
There you go.
Oh,
There we go.
okay.
I don't know.
So this horse here is a picky eater, and he was like, no problem. He was just. But he came back.
He was like, more.
Yeah, this is Draken will eat. He will come from the back of the pasture for a little Debbie's oatmeal cake.
Yeah.
And I did have some carrots with me because I was like, if they had been in the Middle Ages, they would have grown up on this and they would have just been part of their diet. And I wanted them to fairly try it, and then they did come back in later and say, okay, I'll eat it again. I was like, that's fair. The donkeys, on the other hand, were like, yeah, it's a dragon. That's where he's doing this, he got it stuck in his teeth.
Oh.
On both times he did that.
Were you giving it to them in like a slice or crumbling it? How did you
So,
serve it?
I literally just quartered like small pieces to begin with. The second piece of bread, they just, like, he took it from my hand, like as a bigger piece. So I thought he would, I was really worried about him choking at that point, and he did not.
So like they could have just like had slices and like, oh, that horse gets 3 slices, that one gets 2.
I'm thinking they just gave him a loaf.
Oh, they gave them the whole loaf of the serving.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Because it's, back in the day, they would have been working, they would have only gotten it maybe once or twice a day. And I think you just got, I think maybe they broke the loaf open, and the rest of it, good luck surviving on your own.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would like more, please.
Ollie's like, hey!
I'll just follow you to the kitchen.
He was very happy about that, and when I had the second one, he was like, we're there for that. Ty was like, but he's much shyer around people, so not a big surprise there. But they definitely ate it. Now Lady Gesa, she tried it with her big giraffes, and they're not as used to having treats, and they were a little bit more suspicious about it, and they did not eat it the second time. When we get back, we're going to try it with Dan Cope's horses and see what they think. So this Draken will eat pretty much anything. Bucky is very, very particular. He will eat carrots, but he doesn't like apples. Although he will occasionally eat a Granny Smith if I eat it first. We got there. But he is not an apple fan. So they have taste buds just like us. And if you ever kind of want to get an idea of what those type of taste buds are, try different types of honey. Because it's a really subtle flavor. And we think that that's probably what their taste buds are like. With our 4-H kids, that's what we do, is we try different types of honey, and they think that's great, but it's pretty close. We've all had clover honey and tried clover.
Can you reiterate again when you said you worked with your 4-H kids? So like you would serve up like several flavors of honey and go, this would be the difference of like legumes to the horses?
So, there's a difference between alfalfa, clover, and all these different things. So we had 4 different types of honey, I believe it was, and they were all under the age of 10. I should mention with these kids, do not give them a lot of honey, because I didn't really know the first time, and I learned. And they all have their spoons, and they just tried little bits of honey, and some of them could taste the difference between them, and some of them couldn't. But they could see the visual difference. Some honeys are different, darker, and different things, and that really connected for them. And they just got a little drop for each of them, and then they wanted more. Do not give them more. Giving them to their parents.
It's like the different grasses.
Yeah.
That's great.
And we looked at the different grasses at the same time, because we can match clover to clover, those type of things, and they enjoyed that. Not to digress into my 4-H stuff, but We also did different salt blocks. And I thought, oh, they'll just look at the salt blocks. No, they tasted every single one of them. I was like, I had just bought them at TSC, and I was like, it might have a little shelf dust on it. And they're like, no problem. And I just passed it around. They all licked at a different spot.
Yeah.
But
That sounds exactly what would happen.
Yes.
Because as soon as you said we tried different salt blocks, all that went in my head was, well, I'd look at salt block.
Yeah. We all did as kids. And there's a different taste to the mineral, and also how the texture is on your tongue, and different things. So they really enjoyed that. And now the big thing that is in horses to do a water buffet. Have you seen that?
Yes.
Yes. I have not done that yet, but you do different flavors of water and see which flavor your horse likes best, and then that's what you're supposed to offer occasionally. We're not to that level of buffet and spoiledness yet. They just do plain water.
I was going to say, that's a lot of effort. I do not care what water my dog drinks. I don't care if he's got it.
As long as it's clean, I'm good with it. Which one thing with this bread, particularly the one that goes for the racehorses, no water. They're very, very specific about no water. You can put milk in it if you need to, but it needs to be whole milk. I assume that that's because they want them to have the fat. I was curious as to why we put eggs in it, and apparently they fed bread with eggs to stallions as well, and it's to do with the fertility, and also the protein in it. But I was like, why are we feeding egg bread to stallions? But they seemed to feel that that was going to do something for them. I think it probably just made them feel good. Nature took care of the rest of it.
That's interesting because in Master of Game, they talk about with female dogs, if you feed them more protein, if you feed them more meat as opposed to bread, because dogs are also fed on bread, that they would stay in heat longer.
Oh, I'm sure somebody has studied it.
Yeah.
But that's not beyond my limit of involvement.
So the subject, this has nothing to do with horse bread, but to the subject of, I am a baker, it's to the subject of eggs and no water. That is the formula for a pound cake.
Yes.
The only liquid is the egg white.
It does have beer in it.
Okay.
The ale in it. In their day, the ale, it would have been leftover stuff, and that would have substituted in for the yeast, as I understand it. I don't have that. Someday we have a brewery up near us. I want to get some of that, but I haven't yet. Which brings me to the question of, well, why did they not just feed the leftover stuff, and how healthy is this for horses? Before I do, this was my lovely procession on Thursday night, and my loaf, I have finally conquered the sourdough loaf this last month, and this loaf looked beautiful as well. In my oven, it needs an extra 5 minutes. I was so thrilled with myself, I kid you not. So they used to try to give horses leftover brewers waste, and it doesn't work. And it doesn't work if you feed all horse bread, and the question is, why is that? Because anytime you feed all of one thing, it leaves out minerals and things like that. So there is some downsides of feeding horse bread if that's all you feed. And oddly enough, the Kentucky Equine Research did some research on it. And so wheat is deficient in vitamins A, D, and E, as well as some trace minerals like zinc, copper, and selenium. And without enough calcium in the diet, the horse's body will start pulling the minerals from its bones and weaken them, and you get these severe calcium deficiencies that cause problems with their bones, particularly when you're talking about horses that are working. Their bodies just can't handle it. Oddly enough, the protein content of bread flour, which is supposed to be 13 to 14%, is marginally adequate for a growing horse or a pregnant lactating mare, as long as they have hay or pasture available as well. So a mare that's turned out with a foal would have been doing okay, because she probably would not have been working there for, probably 30 days or so. But now we get to do the good thing and taste test. So just a few more minutes here. So I have 2 options for you, well, 3 options. You're welcome to try it plain. None of it will kill you. The honey is available. I personally like the one with the seaweed and the green beans in it with, or excuse me, split peas in it with the honey. And I also brought butter. I have not yet had the butter on the one with the eggs, but I think that it will probably taste better. So if you'd like to come up, I have a couple of knives. I have lots of paper towels. So we need to not get near the grand piano. I'm going to say that that's probably an ask for them. And you're welcome to taste test this. We have lots of bread. If you have a horse and you want to take some home for it, I have saran wrap, so you can take some home. And it's quite tasty. So if you'd like to come up, you can choose what you would like to put on your bread. Yes. I wish we had a table, but we don't. So. Feel free to help yourself.
Oh wow, it's
Yeah, I like that one. Let me try to make
them samples.
yes, however many you think you need there. This one is very light and it's much more reminded of actual bread. Now the funny thing is back then, white bread, which we now think is less healthy, was the thing that the rich people ate, and the wheat bread, which we now think is more healthy, is what the poor people ate. So,
because of the processing.
I'm sorry?
Oh, because of the processing, to get white bread, you have to process
Because you remove
corn.
the bran and it's a whole thing.
Yeah. And I think also, like when we talk about feeding bread now, I think our bread has so much more sugar in it than it used to. Because I do know people that go down to like, you know, they get the dollar bread or whatever and throw it out to the horses every once in a while, and they'll eat it, but it has no nutritional value whatsoever for them. And personally, my horse likes the Little Debbie cake much better. And at least it has oatmeal in it.
Oh, those Twinkies.
Yes, well, I draw the line at donuts, but, well, excuse me, I shouldn't say that. I draw the line at chocolate. But the same horse went to Kentucky one year, and he was fresh off the track, and he wouldn't eat all the, like, we were there for like a week, and like we're 3 or 4 days in, and he hasn't ate. When we're trying everything, we're doing molasses, whatever. We left him to go back to the campsite or whatever, and he ate half a dozen donuts.
Oh.
And then for the rest of the trip, he was just fine. He ate whatever he wanted to eat. You know, and I was like, okay. If the donuts are what makes it work, whatever. But molasses wasn't cutting it that day.
I used to work with a horse that if you had crinkly plastic on in your back pocket, he assumed you had Twinkies on you, and he would attack you for them. Not meanly, but like large drag force shoves you around to try to find the Twinkie in your back pocket.
Like getting mugged by a very large animal.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was like.
We don't normally feed them in the pasture like we do in the video because of that, because all 4 of them come at you at the same time, and you're like, boys, do not step on me. But they are, they know what we have in your pocket. They can hear your heartbeat, and they can be used for tracking, so I assume that they have a good sense of smell and can find you. So I don't think the carrot in my pocket is any surprise. The fact that they can count how many I have in my pocket, that is a surprise. But there's plenty of it here if you'd like to take some. So.
In the ruble reading, he talks about the crust of breads, feeding those to the dog. Is that where we get our like mother saying the crust is the healthiest part for us, or like children should eat the crust?
So I think that partially is because the crust, just like when you get really good sourdough, is really tough. Was tough on people's teeth, and it's tough on the horse's teeth because a lot of times they would put it in milk. So I think the soft stuff was considered to be the better stuff.
So okay, so when they said the horses would eat it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So whatever the animals eat is considered not as good. And like if you eat horse bread, you're at the bottom of the social totem pole. So I would assume the servants or whoever got the crust, and it goes down.
Okay, so our phrases today about that we should eat the crust did not originate from the racehorse people insisting on that.
To my knowledge, I'm going to say no, but I am not an expert on that particular question.
I didn't know if it like come up in reading of like, you know, this is what
Not
I'm
yet,
saying
but
came from.
there were some other things that came up in my reading. So I'm also, I have 2 other projects that I'm working on. One is I've been making some different types of archery targets out of different things, and how different plant fibers mold and how that worked in the Middle Ages is interesting. But I got into that with the feed. But I'm also working on what happened to war horses after the war is over. And that gets really interesting as well, because what they were fed and how they can tell when they had a change of diet, and therefore they are probably not owned by the knight anymore. They've been literally farmed out. But it gets really interesting about who eats what and when. But that's another TED Talk.
I'm not an expert, but from what I have read, crusts in the Middle Age period were very, very tough and hard to eat, like much more so than now, even artisan bread now. And so my understanding is that generally crusts were given to animals and not eaten by people, because they would have just been too hard to eat. My suspicion is that piece about eating the crust is less about it being nutritional and more about not creating waste. We have a lot of food related traditions in the United States that are based on like wartime rationing, where it's about, like Depression era. You don't want to throw food away that is acceptable, but then we'll come up with reasons for why you might still do that even though we're no longer in.
So kids eating the crust of bread is more a matter of I'm getting my kids to
Yeah, a modern, locally, not an ancient one.
Right.
Yeah. Because the bread crust used to be really, really tough.
Yeah.
That is a product of baking at high heat on fire.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is hard to get. If you've ever had bad wood-fired pizza, you will have experienced this. Of like the crust is so hard and like dense and chewy in a way that is unpleasant to eat.
I thought when this first came out of the oven that it was not going to, I thought really it wasn't going to be cooked in the middle. It could have used another 5 minutes, but it was so heavy. I was
So
like, dang.
the second one with the eggs in it.
Yeah. I'm just going to pass this around so you can feel how heavy this is.
It reminds me a bit of like whole wheat challah bread.
Yes, well, and I thought maybe that was because of the eggs, but I didn't know.
Yes. It tastes similar as well, but yeah, it's a very like sort of dense, hearty bread.
So that piece right there that was going around, that's probably a quarter loaf. This is more of a,
Or having up extra cold.
well, it's still delicious.
I've seen that.
I see.
No.
No.
Yep, I'll take it. Here, you take that. Just go watch the last. I mean, it has some weight.
Yeah, definitely. It's
Not as much.
But yet it's a different density than this.
yes.
I was,
That definitely reminds me more of oh gosh, I'm going to be a fool here, but like a sweet bread, like a banana bread.
yes. Well, and I thought like a date bread, like
Yes, exactly.
I think it's the moisture in it and the texture. But when I put the split peas in there, that was the grossest thing I've touched in a long time. I'm pretty liberal about things, and I was like, I'm never doing this one again.
Did you soak your peas
Yes,
ahead of time? Okay.
I did. I followed the recipe
Gotcha.
on how to soak them. I think if I wanted them softer, they should have had more water in them, but I left them overnight, like they said, with the right amount of water to pea ratio. But they're still, I've never used split peas before, so maybe they're always a little tough, but they are like having a sunflower seed or a pumpkin seed in it, like they're still got that texture in it. So I don't know if that ever goes away, but I'm not using canned peas, that's for sure.
But yeah.
You know, soak it till it's mush, basically, to get that.
Yeah, and I think you probably, like if, the thing with this is it's going to the horses, so at the end of the day, if you screwed up a recipe someplace else, or you had leftover peas from dinner or whatever, it went in the pot, I'm pretty sure. And that's part of the reason why there's not a lot of written down recipes, is because a lot of it's just, hey, what do you have? I mean, it has seaweed in it, because seaweed was easy to get at that time. I wasn't sure how the seaweed was going to come out. I don't mind seaweed, like, just eat it out of the packet thing, but it took like 4 or 5 sheets of the seaweed to make enough to be what they said. It was different. But I thought maybe it would be salty or something like that, and it's not. Not at all.
Did you read any other animals receiving the bread? Any other
So
animals?
I know the dogs did.
Okay.
Apparently some cattle did, but apparently the cattle you just send, they're not in the city. And which doesn't make sense. So the only time the cattle really got it was when they were hauling long distances, and cattle were more efficient than oxen were more efficient at that time for hauling long distances than horses, if you had time. And they seem to have been fed some of it, but they have different nutritional needs. Same thing with the yaks. Yaks, the reason why they don't travel a lot is because they don't do well on processed food. They have to have like green grass, so they have to have grazing time. I think that's a little bit the same with the steers and the oxen.
What about rabbits? Did you hear about rabbits being fed in burrows?
No.
Rats? Okay. All right.
Yeah, I have to draw the line somewhere. I do go occasionally over into the wolves to find out what the wolves are doing because they attack horses and stuff, but the rabbits don't cross over to the equine, so I've left them alone. As long as they don't dig in my pasture, I won't research them.
Well, sometimes you'll, like, in the reading, they'll be like, and these 10
Yeah.
animals receive this grain substance, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, not with mine. And quite frankly, there is a lot of difference between when you're researching livestock and researching food animals. I think there's a difference there.
Well, you look like you had mostly jockey books that you were researching.
So I really got into. I went down this rabbit hole into the economics of it.
Okay.
And that really got interesting to me, and I can't quote it back to you because quite frankly it's really a lot of numbers and a lot of specific things, but the fact that a lot of the things that we know about carriage driving, which is my particular interest, and horses in that time, is because of laws. And so you start tracking laws and trying to figure out where it is and how horse is spelled or different things like that. Those are the type of things that I go off on a tangent with. And most of the time, rabbits, chickens, guinea pigs, even to a certain extent pigs do not come into that realm. The livestock will, cattle will, but they're not using them for other things for transportation, and that's where the cross is for me.
Very good.
But I get into some weird transportation research.
Okay, so on that, did they just have so they were going on a long carriage ride, did they just buy a basket of horse loaves and take with them?
Yes.
Okay, oh, very cool.
Yes. So and there's a lot of things that are that way that are meant to be disposable. They're very cheap. You were talking about the Japanese things. So you can use wheat and rye flour, straw to make in Japan the little boots that go on the horses and save their feet that are the opposite of their version of a horseshoe. And those are a penny or 2 a piece. The same thing is true with the horse bread. It's just really cheap because it's very disposable. It's very easy to have until it gets into the point where they start regulating who makes it. Anybody could make it. But then you have to go 7 years without a baker. I'm like, what do you do in the remainder of the 7 years? And apparently you just smuggle it in from the side, or you have to literally go down to the next neighborhood to get it. But a lot of those times that left a gap in the community, and so somebody that was looking to come up in the world, or a son or something like that would come and fill that niche. It seems to be.
And the law was specifically you couldn't make it for sale unless you were a baker or had a baker.
Yeah.
So
I'm a little.
you could make horsebread to feed your own horses, but.
So it gets a little iffy because, technically speaking, in the city you're not supposed to. And I'm not an expert in how a house was set up there, but I know a lot of the people just went and bought their bread, and so I would assume the same is true because they just weren't set up that way.
Right.
So if you're not set up to make your own bread, I don't think you're set up to make horse bread. That said, if you're out in the country and you know you're going to go on a long journey and you need some horse bread, who's going to stop you? I think that stuff happens more often than we really know, but it's not well documented because the practicality of it is you have to have it when you travel. And again, how much traveling did they do? some people did a lot, and other people never left that village. So, truthfully, we'll probably never know. But it amazes me the things that we discover every day. And that's one of the good things that came out of COVID was that more and more our documents are being digitalized, and therefore we can do more research on them from a broader perspective. There's a war horse book coming out next year that is going to be fantastic. I've been reading a little bit of it, and I'm like, oh, I need that $125 book. Because it's coming, but it'll be out in 2025, and that partially is from research that started during COVID, and they've digitalized those records, and now these people can go in and do some research on it, which is cool.
You were talking a little bit about the problem with the hay is that it would mold very easily.
Yes.
Bread also molds extremely easily.
But you don't have to store that.
Okay.
This you have to store. So to get it into feed for your horses, you would have to bring it in from the countryside and then store it somewhere in a building. So it's A, flammable,
Okay.
and B, it molds. Until you learn how to dry it properly, and even back in the day, they had trouble with it catching on fire.
Right.
And so why would you, when you start thinking about it, why would I bring something into my house that is, or my stable that is flammable, and not particularly effective, and it's not cost effective, so the risks outweigh the rewards.
Okay.
And I think that's, now whoever came up with this in the first place, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't think we'll ever know, but that's why.
Yeah. So it's not something that would be stored long term, it's something that you would kind of
There's a
get
couple
as
of
you feed it.
references about storing it for 3 days before you feed it, and even the other one, you're supposed to wait a day. But it doesn't, it's not like we stockpile it.
Right.
Yeah. As the winter goes through, you're making it 3 days, I would assume, I don't know, that they're making it 1 day a week and then just going with it.
Right. Okay.
I would really like to read some baking accounts, but will I probably ever? But yeah, okay. Figure out how they actually did that. Yeah. Any other questions? Any horse questions? Because I will go down that rabbit hole. I've been known to talk about those for 3 or 4 days in a row.